If you love Baltimore sports, you'll love WNST.net.
Here's John West, the king of chili.
Good morning, John West, AM 1570 WNST. We're going to go a little no huddle this morning in homage to the Ravens. A lot of things to talk about today. I want to start with, I don't know if I'll actually get from it, but about a week and a half ago, Nestor had invited Peter King from Sports Illustrated down to Amici's for, he called it a tweet up. It was an opportunity for about 30, 40 people to get together and grill Peter King with questions about the NFL. He's one of your Sports Illustrated senior writers, and he's also a voter for the Hall of Fame. And so the questions start coming, and very early on in the question session, I threw my hand up and I said to Peter, "You're in the room, why is Art Modell not in the Hall of Fame?" And I think he maybe was a little taken back from that. I think he was ready to talk about the Ravens, but he went off, and it was a little disheartening to hear what he had to say, and I wanted to share that with you now. Briefly talked about it on my blog at WNST through Chesapeake Chili and Sports. Peter was talking about Art not in the Hall of Fame and probably not getting in the Hall of Fame. I gave two reasons. One is that he moved the team. Okay, there's no question he moved the football team out of Cleveland. He left the name, and he left the history. And we here in Baltimore, we know and cherish that, how much value that is to Cleveland, when Art's the only one to have ever done that. He left them, and he left them probably for a week or two without football before the NFL stepped in and said, "Don't worry, Cleveland, we're going to take care of you." And then he came here and he gave us the Baltimore Ravens, and we have cherished it ever since. And the fact that that's keeping him out is concerning. The other thing Peter talked about, was the money issue. Art Modell is in the 60s, was one of the first pioneers, if not the first pioneer, to talk about revenue sharing with the NFL. And that's the goose that lays a golden egg for them. The revenue sharing is what drives the competitive balance in NFL and gets them to where they are today. And he was the one that had the idea, and he promoted it. And the NFL wouldn't be probably where it is today without that. And Peter King addressed that a little bit. He talked about how the owners are not at all impressed with that, certainly in the voting room, because the impression he gave is that they kind of think they're going to get to that anyhow. That Art, just because he was the first one to have that idea, doesn't make it special that the rest of the owners were going to figure that out, which is problematic. And then he talked a little bit about, drew a comparison with the Buffalo Bills owner, who just recently got in the Hall of Fame, Ralph Wilson, and the comparison was made between Art and Ralph. And Peter mentioned that Ralph never left the Bills, didn't take the Bills out of town, and he was the brilliant one who voted against this last contract, this last labor contract, with the players, and that he's kind of viewed Ralph Wilson, that is of the Bills, as kind of a sage with respect to being able to foretell into the future that that's going to be a problem, and that's not at all a direct comparison. There's a problem that there isn't anyone in the room voting for the Hall of Fame that seems to be rallying or championing for Art Modell. And I came away from the meeting with that. The other thing I really needed to share with you guys this morning is the story that Pete talked about when it comes to the Ravens and their hands-on feel with the fans. He's mentioned it several times. It's probably been mentioned here a couple times. The Ravens are the best NFL team, certainly during the preseason, in terms of being hands-on, being very touchy with the players and with the fans of this town. And there's a reason why for that. And he talked a little bit about this story, and I wanted to share that with you. That as preseason begins, Kevin Byrne calls everyone in the room, and I think it's everyone. I'm not sure if the veterans have to come back. And he throws this picture on a screen. And it's an old black and white picture of Johnny Unitas, Indianapolis Colt legend. It drives me crazy. And he's there in a black and white photograph in Westminster College back in the early mid-'60s, shaking hands and looking down with a young kid. And he talks about how that relationship with kids and the fans is so critical to this organization. And as he goes on to tell that story, he then mentions who that young boy is. And that, of course, is Baltimore Ravens owner Steve Bisciotti. And it really solidifies from the top that the Baltimore Ravens care about the fans, that they really look for the fans to kind of drive that passion. And what's awesome is that it's so directly comparable in a negative way to the owner of the Baltimore Orioles. That we at least get not what we want, but what we deserve out of our fandom with the Baltimore Ravens, and it starts right there at the top, and I couldn't be more excited to be a fan. So, thank you very much. John West, WNST.
If you love Baltimore sports, you'll love WNST.net.